Hello, I am Wendy Weaver Orlowski, the creator of the Cabezal Jewelry Molds, and today I'd like to show you just how easy it is to make beautiful, unique jewelry consistently using your Cabezal Jewelry Molds. Today we are going to be working with the Cabezal Cuff Molds, and first of all I will show you the single thick, and then we'll go on and I'll show you the triple thin.
Because we need the clay to be thick enough to get up into this mold, and with a mold this size, I'm going to say that one single thickness on the thickest setting of your pasta machine is not going to do it. So what I have done is I have sheeted this clay on the third thickest setting. So not the thickest, not the second thickest, but the third thickest setting. So I'm going to cut that in half. That's going to give me lots of room. There's one layer. And then I will carefully layer this one on top. And I'm going to start at the center, trying to avoid air bubbles. So we need to spritz this with water so that the clay doesn't stick. You're going to place that down, and then I'm going to use my acrylic roller, and I'm going to hold it in my fist, and I'm going to start at the center and start with the bezel portion, and then just work my way all the way around. I'm going to shut the camera off for this because it's attached to my table, and my table is going to move like crazy, I think, and probably make you seasick. Just so you know, this is probably the most challenging of the Cabezal molds just because of its size. So it takes a few minutes to get the clay up into the mold. But as you can see, we have some nice lines there. Once you remove all the water, it's time to cut your shape out. And with the bezels, I almost 100% of the time tell you to leave the clay stuck down to your patty papers and will bake on the paper. And this is no exception. I will probably end up cutting the paper right through the clay, and that is fine. So I'm going to use a long blade. And I'm just going to line it up, cutting straight down with your blade. Let's remove the excess. Now, I will go right to the edge there, move that excess.
If you didn't happen to cut all the way through your paper when you were cutting the clay, then now is the time to trim your paper to a more manageable size. Uh, you also want to make a design decision right now. How are you going to keep your bracelet closed? Or are you going to leave it as a cuff more than a bangle? Okay, I just wanted to say this is a great time for you to decide how you want to close your bracelet, if you want to close your bracelet. This will be the last time your bracelet is flat, so if you want to use a little round Kemper cutter or similar to cut holes, whether you're going to lace it or just pull elastic through it like I'm going to show you, now is a good time to decide if you can. If you can't, if you're like me and you kind of make decisions later on, that's fine. You can always use a drill bit.
These tape rolls for packing tape work really well because they can be put in the oven. Just make sure you take all the tape off first. If you have a large wrist, you put your clay on the outside, your bracelet. If you have a scrawny little wrist like I do, you can put it on the inside, and then this will bake it on a curve. Okay, I realize that I may not have explained myself clearly enough about baking on the inside of a roll, so I've just cut some lengths of clay, approximately the length of your cabezel bracelet. And this is what I mean by baking on the inside. And the clay will be thicker, and there's usually no problem with getting it to stay. It's not going to slip out on you. So this is where I bake on the inside. You'll see that there's still a fairly big gap here. This is what I mean by baking on the outside of the roll. And you're probably going to have a hard time getting it to stick. So I suggest you cut some paper and loosely wrap it around, because this is your bezel part here and you don't want to squish it. And you're just going to loosely put the paper there and tape it in place.
So if you think that you're not going to use a closure on this, once it comes out of the oven, or even when you're baking, try to find something to bake on or cool on that will allow the edges of the bracelet to touch. Okay, so this is just a really quick recap. Don't forget to spritz your mold with water, or else the clay is going to stick. And you're going to have to experiment with this because all pasta machines are different, but I suggested using 2 layers of clay on the 3rd thickest setting instead of 1 layer on the thickest, because it's just not thick enough. So work your way from the center to the outside to avoid air bubbles. And then, of course, with this bracelet, you have the choice to leave it as one big thick one, or 3 singles, or a double and a single. Okay, let's make some paper templates. Okay, so if you're familiar with the other cabezel molds, you know that one side of the mold makes the bezel, like we've just done here with the cuff bracelets, but then there's usually another side that makes the cabochon. And these bracelet molds don't come with that. And that is because the area is so large, we can fill it with so many different things, and we don't need the area to be raised. So I'm going to show you now how to make some paper templates, and then we're going to use some decorative paper as the insert. You are going to use some acrylic paint and some kind of a roller, and just apply paint to the top surface. Try not to get it in the grooves, as it will just be a little more difficult for you to remove the paint from the grooves. Okay, now you just need to apply your painted cabezel onto a piece of paper. Cardstock is actually a great choice here because it gives you a nice firm edge to trace around. You want to wash the paint off immediately in just some warm soapy water before it dries. Okay, it doesn't take very long for the paint to dry, so now you're ready to cut the inserts out. Okay, you're going to notice that my bezels have been baked flat. I wanted to make a set just to demonstrate the templates. Once you get your templates cut out, make sure they fit. I mean, they're not going to be perfect, but this is a chance where you can adjust it, mostly width-wise. Don't worry about the length too much, as we're going to have to add a little bit of length because we baked on a curve, and I will explain that later.
And you'll want to keep both of the positive shapes and the negative shapes as well. And the reason you want to do that is because the negative frame, oops, just hit my camera there, will help you to position and find out what, like use it as a window, a viewfinder, and you'll find, oh, that's kind of pretty, what you want to put in your bracelet. Okay, I just learned something. I learned that your paper template will fit perfectly if you're not going to curve your bracelet. Like if you're going to use this as a bookmark, this template is fine. However, once you curve your bracelet, you will see that this paper is no longer quite long enough. So what I suggest you do is leave one end uncut and make sure when you're tracing this out that there's some extra on the end, and don't cut it. So I'm using the edges of this pattern to my advantage. And what I'm going to do is just put a few marks because this is a straight line. Oops. And then I'm going to take my ruler, I'm going to find those marks, and then I'm going to cut with a blade, and I'm going to leave extra at the end. I will cut my curves at this end, I've traced them, but I will leave this as extra. So I've left the extra at the end. I'll quickly cut this out. Now, if you want, you can leave these edges, especially for the first few times. You're not sure if how accurate the template you made is. You can always cut this after it's in the baked bezel. Okay, I'm going to coat this paper now. And like I said previously, you could use a multi-purpose sealer, you could use just white glue. And why I'm doing this is just to make sure that nothing bleeds through. Like if I chose to use a liquid clay or a resin, like an art resin, if I didn't do this first, the resin might soak through and mottle this paper. And once you've done all that work and your bracelet is like pretty much complete, you don't want anything bleeding through this paper. So that's why I suggest you do this. Make sure that you don't have any air pockets in there, because that will cause wrinkles. Also, don't saturate your paper too much or it may tear. So we don't want too much glue. Go all the way to the end. And then I want to push the air out. Try not to stretch it too much. Now you can do a couple things. You can try to go in with a really sharp blade now, or you can lift it up and you can use scissors. These little scissors are amazing. They're one of the Tim Holtz sets. Okay. Take the large end of this stylus and just very gently push it into the crevices, just to make sure you have a good bond. Oh, there you go. Okay, so if you weren't fortunate enough to know that you wanted to use some kind of a clasp before you baked this, then you can easily use a drill press. I have attached some grid paper here so that I can easily line my bracelet up. You know, I can kind of see that it's centered. I have to look around the side, which I won't do right now, but I've done a little test. I've made a mark. I've checked and I'm happy with the placement, and the grid paper definitely helps with that. So you can see that didn't take very long at all, and you have a really smooth hole.
You probably already have a collection of buttons and things. I know I do. So I really liked the color of this orange one, but unfortunately, I thought it looked a little bit too small. Um, I found another one to go underneath, but then realized that my elastic, no matter how hard I tried, I cannot pull 2 layers of elastic through that little hole. And because those ones are, I think, made of shell, it was too hard for me to drill. So I decided I would just make them out of polymer clay. It's really important that you know the size of your elastic before you start drilling holes. You'll also see that you can either have one hole and pull the elastic through twice, like a double thickness, or if that's going to cause a problem, then drill 2 holes if you're making your own buttons instead of bringing it through the one hole. Do a little trial run before you tie the knot. So you're going to have it threaded through the buttons and everything, hold the elastic, and then slip your wrist through just to make sure there's enough give for your hand to go through the bracelet. Hey, I really hope you found that video useful. Feel free to check back often. I'm really hoping to come up with more videos on how you can use your Cabezal jewelry molds. I really think they're a great tool for helping polymer clay jewelry makers, so check back often. Thanks for watching. I'm Wendy Weaver Orlowski, and I hope to be back soon.